This podcast ponders how we will live in this COVID era.
What's on the horizon?
What should we expect?
Where are the opportunities? We explore the what's next in the next normal.
Lisa Taylor, president of Challenge Factory.
The reason every decision we go to make is so difficult is because it's laden with moral hazard. We can't actually judge what's good and bad.
Dave Hardy, president of Hardy Stevenson and Associates.
COVID has really pushed us to think about what healthy cities mean.
Sarah Thorne, president and CEO at Decision Partners.
We've really acknowledged the recognition and the safety and the caring for each other because we've adopted these new behaviors.
Ujwal Kulgud, chief anthropologist and CEO at Motive Base.
And this is not just because of the pandemic, this is because a lot of us have gained new knowledge.
So have we arrived in the next normal yet? I really want to know. By the way, I'm Erin Trafford.
I'm Dave Trafford, yeah, and I think that's an awesome question because every time you turn your head, right? Okay, that was normal 3 weeks ago and it's not normal now, right? Mm-hmm. You know, we're gonna get to a point where the kids are all back in the classrooms, and is this normal or is this sort of temporary? So it's all of this kind of, we're on kind of shifting ground here.
We are on shifting ground, and we're going to dig in today into, I guess that's a really good point to draw on, the shifting myth of age and what age means in this normal that we're in, especially when we consider the workforce, how it's changing, how it's adapting. I mean, I think the pandemic really highlighted for us the skills gap and the way we were looking at it as an age-based thing. And maybe it's not really that.
Well, yeah, and I think you're right. The whole tech side of it, personally, it drives me crazy when a guy my age, somebody I went to school with, says, I don't understand all this computer stuff and the internet. Shut up. This has been part of our lives since we were in our 30s. There's no excuse for that. But here's what's interesting. Your grandmother is awesome at navigating the internet. She can find her way to and from, orders online, does all this stuff. Mm-hmm. So the idea that somehow somebody in their 70s or their 80s is ill-equipped to be productive in this new technologically based economy or workplace, I think we've shaken that myth to the core.
I absolutely do. And just before we hit record on this, I let you know that I had a woman who is 76 years old apply to be in one of my upcoming programs all about Google and SEO. And I had no idea how old she was until she told me. And I thought I had to actually check my bias on that because I just assumed that the people who apply for my programs are, under the age of 45. And it's just was not the case. And I was floored. So I think that sets up today's conversation really, really well. And of course, we're kicking things off with Lisa Taylor and her take on this whole concept of the gray tsunami, which is not a phrase she likes, by the way.
No, it makes her grind her teeth, I think.
Right, the gray tsunami, my least favorite phrase for this very normal and very positive demographic trend that we are living longer. It casts such a negative light into the concept that we have added years of engagement and productivity and relationship building. It makes it seem like it's a disaster that's happening instead of a triumph. And I think it sets the tone for how we think about age, and not just those that are aged, but all of us who are aging. I mean, we're aging from the minute that we enter this earth. And yet when we talk about age and aging, we tend to just think about the most senior, the oldest within our cohort. And I think that it's really important that we come to terms that we are out of date with our own life expectancy. This podcast is all about the next normal, taking a look at the post-COVID world and the shocks that have happened as a result of COVID and how we're moving past that. One of the things that's really important at Challenge Factory and with the organizations that we're working with is to make sure that everyone recognizes before COVID happened, we were in the midst of a demographic-based revolution. The Talent Revolution is a book that's focused on workplace change that's being led by demographics. It was published in 2019 before COVID was on the radar. So as we're exiting the crisis, we are resuming an ongoing revolution. And that's because of this outdated notion of what it means to age and how old is, quote unquote, old. I'll just give a couple of statistics to kind of just frame, just some context to frame this discussion. But when the retirement age was set at 65 across North America, it was 1935, and life expectancy was 62 years old. So retirement was brought into workplaces as a palliative program to help people who were already past life expectancy live up to the dictionary definition of retirement, which means to withdraw or to conclude. You retire to bed in the evening. The dictionary definition doesn't say you retire to a party. And so what we've done is we now have an 83-year life expectancy. We're living longer, and that's from all kinds of, great advances in medicine, right from infant mortality rates dropping all the way through to medicine that keeps us healthy and vibrant all the way through our lives. We're living longer, but our working life expectancy is frozen as if 65 is a finish line. And because of that, all of the talent structures, the way we think about work, when do we feel like it's too late to make a change? We hear 20-year-olds that feel like they've set themselves on a path and it's too late for them to make a change. This idea of a gray tsunami sets us up to think that aging is a disaster and that population is a disaster, and nothing could be further from the truth. So I think we need to really confront our own age-based assumptions and tackle the myths that we have, whether they're about performance or money or any of the other things that keep us from really recognizing what does it mean to not just have lifelong careers and learning, but long life careers and learning, because that's the shift that we're all living through, COVID or not.
Okay, so there's lots in there, and I want to come back to this whole idea of that workplace application that you talk about and setting a path and whether or not that has been, shaken under our feet. But Sarah Thorne, let me go to you first because, when we hear what Lisa is talking about, very much of this is not just driven culturally, but it's institutionally ingrained. So, for example, our healthcare system is not prepared, I don't think, necessarily prepared now to deal with an aging population. We look at it, as Lisa says, as a negative, as opposed to saying, how can we adjust our healthcare services to make sure that we get the most out of those who are, 65 plus, who are still have plenty to contribute to society?
I think that's a really great place to pick up. And as I was thinking about this episode, I was thinking about work that we did a few years ago for the Public Health Agency of Canada. We were doing modeling, influence modeling on what influences seniors' emergency preparedness for climate change and extreme heat conditions. And this was after the summer when so many people in Europe, particularly France, died of extreme heat. And I was just thinking about it the other day because it's so topical with the extreme heat conditions that we've had in BC in the last few weeks and the number of deaths from heat. So we did this workshop, an expert elicitation workshop, and I usually like to make sure we're all on the same page with definitions. And so I just wanted to make sure that we had, we all had a shared understanding of seniors. Well, we ended up spending about 2.5 hours talking about seniors and what seniors means. I mean, is seniors some number that's assigned? Is it 65? Is it 55? Then we get into young seniors, old seniors. We got into this whole thing. And at the end of the day, one of the key learnings for me that came out of the work that we did was that making assumptions that seniors are all vulnerable is absolutely wrong. And one of the things that we've learned and seen in our subsequent work is that seniors, in fact, may be the most resilient in times of change, times of uncertainty. What determines how seniors can respond are the social determinants of health, not age. So to Lisa's point, we can't pin a number and say this is the age where we need to retire, or a company I used to work for called it decelerate, which to me always seemed like driving a car into a wall. But, we need to think about what's the language that we're using? What are the assumptions we're making? What are the stereotypes we're putting around seniors?
So Ujwal, when we look at that, then let's break the mold here. I mean, based on what Lisa and Sarah are saying, how do we break that mold? How do we take ourselves out of our comfort zone and find, the path to solution? How do we get there?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to the meanings around aging itself, right? And, fundamentally, as much as it is changing in the North American circumstance, certainly, aging is seen in negative light, primarily associated with, losing one's creativity, losing one's speed and agility, losing the ability to make or develop new ideas, start new things, ventures, ideas. There's a lot of negative meaning associated with aging. And then that, of course, also extends into the world of physical beauty and looks and everything in between. It is also, of course, a feminist issue as well. So I think fundamentally, in order to solve some of these problems, we also need to re-examine, we also need to turn the tide on these meanings that we associate in the Western world with aging. And I compare this, I grew up in India. I compare this to Indian culture, for example, where aging is seen as a positive thing, as something that gives you wisdom, as something that is relied upon heavily. Whereas in the North American context, it is seen, almost as if, it's a sort of a curse, so to speak. And that one has to find all kinds of ways to avoid it, to slow it down, to delay it. So I think fundamentally there's some broader structural issues that have to be tackled in order to change some of the perceptions.
Dave Hardy, when we talk about what you do as a planner, you're always looking 25, 40 years down the road. What that requires is a good deal of confidence and courage in your discipline. Where that does not necessarily always apply is politically. So what we have heard so far is that here are the things that we want to do, take us out of our comfort zone. But we're going to require a level of courageous leadership to be able to say, not only is there, value in the wisdom of the elders, but there's an economic effect here of making sure that we do not waste this resource.
Oh, absolutely. And for example, in the context, my last two hires were 75 and 78 years old people, and they're doing a phenomenal job. And they have a huge amount of skills. But I set that within their context of living in communities and what we really need to do. We haven't done a very good job of building what I call age-friendly communities. And this would include, I call always homes for people. What we need to do is better support and enable those full lives, whether they be work lives or just quality of life as people age. One of the big problems we have is that the private sector really doesn't build homes for people as they age. It's starting to be addressed now through granny flats and additional suites that being allowed in some cities, but we're way behind the eight ball on this. We just have not done the guidelines and thought through how we're going to make sure that these people in their work lives or their non-work lives have high quality of life as they age. So that's a big problem that really nobody's getting on top of, except for a small few municipalities.
So, Lisa, let me bring it back to you because, when we talk about the gray tsunami, and I don't know, that drives you crazy, but the idea here is that this is, this baby boomer generation is what we're talking about, that is going to enter this retirement period of their lives. And I look around at what's happened in long-term care. I look around and talk about some of the things that Dave Hardy's just mentioned in terms of being able to age in place, that kind of thing. I got news for you. My sense is that this demographic is not going to put up with the standard of care, the standard of living that our grandparents and our parents were prepared to put up with, because it's a different mindset for this generation. My sense is that baby boomers and our kids are going to be the ones who are going to have to make this structural change, not only in the workplace, but politically and institutionally.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And when Dave was talking about how we're behind the eight ball or slow to change in the way that we're designing our cities, I think that we can take a look at where are we demographically. The great thing about demographic change is everyone ages exactly on time, so we can predict it. So we are halfway through the baby boomer population hitting 65. Depending on where you cut the year, most people will agree by 2030 or so, all baby boomers are across that quote unquote finish line. So we're starting to see innovation in the workplace first. And the way that innovation is being cast at the moment is, why won't these baby boomers just go? Like, they're not leaving when they're supposed to leave. They're hanging around forever. And that is a revolutionary act. Baby boomers have had careers that have followed career paths. In the 1970s, a very smart consulting firm came up with the idea that organizations should have career paths and that people should follow them. And baby boomers, for the most of their career, followed career paths because that was the structure. Now, they're at the end of life of the career path, as according to the institution, and they're hanging on. They're finding other things to do. The fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs in Canada is women age 55 plus. They're innovating. They're finding new ways of doing things. And that revolutionary act of not leaving the workplace is just a precursor to what we're going to see as they move past their 60s and into their 70s and into their 80s. It is a massive population that their entire life has made sure society adjusts to the needs that they have. And they're going to continue to do that all the way through. So there's no doubt that we're just at the leading edge of seeing change. And smart employers are recognizing that the myths, for example, that healthcare costs of older workers is too expensive or that productivity drops, those are myths. And if everybody's wanting to stay around, the companies that figure out how to capitalize on that talent, like what Dave is doing, like what Challenge Factory is doing, they're going to be in a competitive advantage because the workforce doesn't end at 60 or 65. We have 20 extra years of potential productivity, and people are eager to do new things. So there's a market dynamic here that will keep us innovating both on the supply and on the demand side as the boomers continue to push the envelope.
Dave, I'd like to pick up here because I think Lisa said something that I'd like to just throw on the table. I think it would be wonderful from a policy point of view if we could just get rid of the word career path. I think that it's a very old-fashioned idea. When I first started working, I can remember having to call my dad, who was an HR guy, worked for Shell for 30 years, and ask him what this ladder was, because I'd had my first performance review and I was told that they were concerned I was peaking too soon and on the career ladder. And I wonder whose ladder was this anyway? Like, where did the ladder come from? I didn't sign up to be on a ladder, especially a ladder that I didn't create myself. And I think that's Lisa's point. I know more people now that are doing incredibly creative, innovative things that they weren't allowed to do when they were on somebody's corporate career ladder. So if we could get rid of the career path and career ladder language and think more holistically about people's life's work, life's passion, what it is they want to invest their life in, how they want to continuously learn and grow, I think that would be a lot more productive.
Ujwal, you wanted to jump in?
We call that transitioning. Oh, sorry. We call that transitioning with purpose. So students transition with purpose into their post-secondary education or into their first jobs. And when you're in your late 20s, you transition with purpose into where you're going to be able to set yourself up to have the family and lifestyle that you're going to want to have. In your 30s and 40s, you transition with purpose into where you're going to find meaning and contribution and to amass wealth and to be able to achieve some of the things that you want to achieve. And then in your 50s and 60s, you transition with purpose into where you want to really put your footprint and leave a legacy, be able to live the legacy for the last 20 years or 15 years of your career. And so I think the concept that it has to follow a path Sarah, I think you're right. I think that's out of date, and most people would feel that. The skill of continuously transitioning with purpose, especially for those that are in their 50s and 60s, and to make that transition with purpose that includes work, meaning, and productivity, I think that's the innovative piece that we need to shift our mindsets to say that's not the exception. That's actually the rule. That's what everyone's doing. They're just not talking about it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a point to that. You know, culture, unfortunately, there's no one factor that changes culture. And ultimately, it becomes a chicken and an egg scenario. You know, we can make policy changes, we can change narratives and employment practices, but people themselves have to change how they think about their careers. They have to change the ideas that they have been born and brought up with. So there's a massive cultural shift that is also necessary, because as long as you have people flocking to buy anti-aging products, taking Botox injections, as long as you have people asking the question, oh, what's my growth opportunity here? Or saying, hey, I'm 50, I have to make this much money even though I'm switching a career. As long as you have these kinds of narratives also existing, you know, you can change one side of the coin, but the other side needs to change as well for us to invent a new currency. So I just also wanted to bring that up because it is unfortunately a chicken and egg scenario, and it takes time, and there is no one way that this is going to change.
Dave?
Ujwal, I just want to toss in, just for one quick example, never mind even the Botox and some of the other things that you're mentioning, which is so true. We need to stop giving each other ageist birthday cards. Like, just think about the birthday cards in the Shoppers Drug Mart and what you give to people you like. Like,
That's
exchange age for any other category, and you would never give that to someone you don't like, never mind your loved one. So we need to individually confront this every single day and see, oh, you know what? Actually, that is wildly inappropriate and not actually my experience at all. I'm going to choose a different path.
What I find is the need. I also hire folks that are in their 20s, and what a dramatic difference between probably I've got four people in their 70s right now, and my folks in their 20s. In their 20s, it's head in your iPad or your phone. You can look up and talk to your boss occasionally, but that's incidental to being on Facebook with your friends. And these are people I'm hiring to actually do work. But there's a set of values and a work ethic that's really important in the senior population. I think still needs to kind of trickle down into our Gen Z. Like, spelling counts when you produce something. Showing up to work counts. You know, talking to your boss and not your friends count. And so all these things, I think, just aren't filtering down. They need to, but that's why, you know, I hire people in their 70s.
Can I just say a round of the clap for Dave Hardy on this whole idea that, yeah, you know what, it matters that you show up on time for work. Right?
Yeah.
This idea that we're somehow focused culturally on the I think the wrong end of the telescope. Dave, I loved it. He's hiring people in their 70s. Why? Because they're good at what they do.
And he's also hiring people, though, as interns in their 20s, fresh out of school, but at the same time, teaching them the things that have always been and always will be true. Spelling counts, being on time counts, being courteous counts, ethics count. And that's where I think this reevaluation of the skills gap, this reevaluation of the way we're looking at age gets really interesting, because it's those people who have the lived and learned experience. And I know that's an overused phrase, but it's those people who inherently understand those things about life and work and productivity.
Well, it's because we've all made the mistakes in our career. And so we saw what happened when we didn't, kind of have that guideline to carry on. But one of the things that, it's interesting you point that out, the value of the experienced worker, we'll say, is one thing. But the introducing the younger crowd into that environment, and where there's a demand on punctuality and some kind of guideline or style guide, as we would have called it in the newsroom. I can recall the days working in CFRB in the newsroom. I was the news director, and we would bring in students every year paid internships, great jobs. Many of them have gone on to be, some the major broadcasters in this country. They would walk in there with 1 year left of education at whatever, Ryerson University, whatever school that they were attending, all accredited, great spots to learn your journalism. But there was nothing like walking into that room because there was 700 years of experience that they could draw upon, and it was so rich. And so, to Lisa's point, it wasn't just one person who had that awesome experience. It was the collective experience of all of those people all of a sudden really made the boat float, right? And the beauty of it is the 19-year-old that walked in there all eager and excited to learn how to be a great journalist tested us all, because the question was, how do you do this? Mm-hmm. And why do you do it that way? Mm-hmm. Right? So those two things really kind of close the loop. And I think Lisa's right. We lose sight of the importance of what we know in the workplace.
The Next Normal is sponsored by Challenge Factory, shaping the future of work.
By Decision Partners. Our world is a better place when we make better decisions.
By Motive Base, decoding implicit meaning behind what people talk about.
And by Hardy Stevenson and Associates, planning the cities of the future.
Comments, questions, or ideas for our hosts? Feel free to drop us an email at hello@storystudionetwork.com.
This series is produced for the Story Studio Network by Eye Contact Productions.